Welcome back. We're talking about the conflict in Yemen. Let's go back to our panel. So let's assume for a moment, shall we, that the Saudis really do want to pull out of this war or pull back in some way. There's a huge amount of work that would need to be done, isn't there, Stephen? For example, they would need to come to some agreement between Iran and the Houthis. They would need to ensure that President Hadi was in some way protected, and also that their border was protected as well. How can they connect those dots?
I think it's a tall order. I do believe that the Saudis have a way out of this. A lot of it at the moment is saving face. I think the Saudis are in so deeply right now, they're afraid that they're going to look as though they were unable to defeat what was at the outset seen to be a ragtag, kind of a militia, if you will, in the Houthis. That's much more sophisticated than that, I think, in reality, but that's the impression that's left. But I do think that what we need right now is a very reinvigorated United Nations-led process that will be as inclusive as possible and bring into the process nations like China and Russia and Iran and every nation that has an ability to influence the parties on the ground, because neither party right now, and well, not just neither, because there's more than just two.
Right.
This is a multiple front war with a lot of different elements, a lot of interests being involved. And there's an enormous war economy which has developed, which is in and of itself a huge impediment to finding a political solution. That needs to be addressed at the same time.
Baraa, it is suggested in these emails that the Saudis feel that there is room for Shia-Sunni diplomacy. Do you think that's true?
I think the problem is how this conflict being portrayed as a Sunni-Shia conflict or a Saudi-Yemen conflict. Yemen is missing from the context of the discussion. The core of the conflict is a Yemeni civil conflict, and this is the main problem that hasn't been addressed properly by many international agencies, including the United Nations or some respectful think tanks in many Western countries. And I think this is a very important part that is missing. The other important, I think, aspect of the conflict, that actually many parts of the country are feeling more and more frustrated why there is an absence of either military clear solution or a military clear victory or an existence of a political solution. And the humanitarian situation keeps deteriorating, and this is a very big problem I think will face the Yemeni people. Right now, most of the Yemeni people don't want to have hostile relationships with Saudi Arabia. Other than the Houthis, the rest of the Yemeni people would like to have just a normal and stable relationship like the rest of the neighboring countries. And I think this is because, simply, if I just put into account, we have almost more than 1 million people who have just crossed the border over to Saudi Arabia. Now, even they are not officially recognized as refugees, but in fact they are refugees living in Saudi Arabia. So I don't think it's in the benefit either of the Saudis or of the Yemeni people that we have this increased tension and hostility going on between both sides.
So, Catherine, it's more than just a war between Saudi and Yemen. It is a Yemeni civil war which has yet to be acknowledged and yet to be resolved. How do you row back from a war that has so many different proxy elements riddled throughout it?
It's going to be very difficult, because I think there have been so many false binaries, that people have kind of accepted. This, for example, Sunni versus Shia, when it's not really true, is it? It's very complicated. There's so many layers, to this conflict. Whether tribal, military. I mean, there's different, I would say, dynamic that are at play, and people with different agendas and an ambition to seize power in Yemen. So it's going to be very difficult to actually offer the people a voice. But I think that the main important issue would be to remember that political self-determination is a principle that the international community needs to abide by, and really offer Yemenis the opportunity to actually carve their own future. And a lot of the time I feel that they have been talked over and that they were not really listened to. And I think this is what has led to this situation in the first place, is that the people were not really given proper representation, and their wishes were not carried out. And we have found ourselves in this situation today. So I think the most important thing would be to really go back to to trying to find a democratic solution, and of course to go back to solving the humanitarian crisis, because I think it's going to be the biggest impediment to peace, is the fact that instability has been is thriving on famine and poverty, and that could lead to radicalization. It is an issue.
Baraa, I see you're eager to jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, we had a process. We had a very representative national dialogue conference that actually resulted into obtaining a new constitution, and we were very close to having a referendum before the Houthis took over the country. And I think whatever solution we try to have regarding Yemen, we need to go back to that process where it has been stopped. And this is the main process, the main problem here. The other important fact to illustrate is actually even when Hadi escaped to the south and the discussions were happening inside Sana'a, he almost escaped. I mean, he escaped assassination by the Houthis when they used the Yemeni jet fighter. So this is not actually a good room for negotiation when you have actually trying to kill an official president. We had a process. And this is what they need to recognize. The Houthis need to understand that actually you can't just enforce your solutions on the rest of the Yemeni people. You represent a part of the Yemeni community, and that's true, and you have the right to be part on the table. And at the end of the day, we need a political solution. Just a military push towards the southern part of the country won't give a long-term sustainable solution.
Well, a political solution is likely to include Iran. Fahad, how is Saudi going to come alongside Iran and bring this to a conclusion potentially?
Well, I agree with Baraa. I mean, this is ultimately a civil war. It began when different Yemeni factions took up arms against, again, the internationally recognized government. It will end when those same parties decide to lay down their arms and go back to the negotiating table. As far as Iran is concerned, Iran has really not played a constructive role at all. It has, in so many ways, actually, as it has done for many years, it has encouraged some of the intransigence and defiance of the Houthis rhetorically, but it has also exported missiles and weapons to the Houthis. There's been at least 4 or 5 shipments that have been interdicted by the United States, Australia, and other forces in the waters around Yemen, where they interdicted Iranian weapons going to Houthi fighters. That is certainly not the way to resolve this dispute. So it has not played a constructive or responsible role. Again, the only thing we've seen is actually encouragement of the Houthis, who clearly from the beginning, I mean, if there is one party to blame, it has to be the Houthis, because that's the party that took up arms and was defiant and took up arms against the internationally recognized government, and has seen or shown the least acceptance, or the least amount of, it showed absolutely no willingness to go back to the negotiating table. And this is according to UN officials as well, not just to Saudi officials.
But Stephen, isn't Iran the massive winner in all of this? It just has to sit back and watch this whole situation unfold. I mean, look at the countries that have slipped away from Western influence. Libya, Turkey, Iraq, Afghanistan, all of those countries really are not under the influence of the West that it was hoped when all this began, 20, 30 years ago, it would be. So the Iranians, big win.
Well, I certainly think the Iranians are sitting in a moment in a very comfortable position. They have a very low-cost, high-impact investment in Yemen. Yemen is of no great consequence to Iran. It is a way to basically poke a stick in the Saudi eye and keep the Saudis and keep the government in Riyadh unnerved and uneasy and uncertain about
it. Even though it sits there on the Horn of Africa, and there's that access to the Red Sea and onto the northern part of the Middle East, still not strategically important to Iran?
Yemen, no, I don't think in and of itself it is. I think what they would like to do is be able to be seen as influential by having the ability to generate that kind of opposition to Sunni regimes such as the one in Riyadh whenever possible. And again, as a way to unnerve the Saudis. But I don't believe that the Iranians see that they want to have a permanent presence in Yemen of any consequence. They have other fish to fry in the region that form more of greater consequence for them.
Well, now, peace, of course, is still the desire, very much so. And China has invested $20 million in humanitarian effort. And I wonder what you think China's role might be in the future going forward to broker some kind of peace. Baraa, you, first of all.
Well, I mean, I don't see China having a huge influence over the Yemeni conflicting parties. It's like I think it does want to see some peace being restored into the country, and just having stability to a level that actually would allow them to start resolving other important files in the region. But it's important to know, yes, of course, China is sitting in the Security Council, and maybe it could be a country that if you're trying to push things forward, then you can maybe talk to them. But I don't see them having either interest or influence over the conflicting parties.
Even with one belt and one road out there, and they want to push that initiative, and solving this would be something that would help that.
Maybe, yeah, but again, you need to have both. You need to have deep interest with the country, but at the same time, you need to have influence. And at the current time, there's not that much of, let's say, trade interest happening between, trade relationship happening between Yemen and China. It's very minimum if you compare it to other countries. And other than having a stable country, that is a desire of many countries, I don't see how they can play a bigger role than they already are.
Catherine, would you, as we come to the end of this program, just give us your view on how we might move forward immediately. Now, given the fact that the emails are out there, we know the Saudis are looking to maybe get out or row back. What do you see as the immediate path forward to peace?
I think we need to have a ceasefire. That would be number one. And again, we need to, for all parties to go back to, to the negotiating table and actually be willing to negotiate peace, because a lot of the time I don't think that people were very genuine about promoting peace and having a political solution. It was more about scoring points and forwarding certain agendas. But I think that so much blood has been spilled already that everybody is now aware that it cannot go on like this, that the country is going to is slipping further away, and that something needs to be done quite quickly. And I think that now we have a real opportunity, to actually have the international community to lean heavily enough on both parties here, Saudi Arabia and Yemen, all factions in Yemen, to actually find a solution, and a solution that would be accepted by the Yemeni people. Again, ultimately, Yemen will have to be made by the Yemeni, and it's something that they're going to have to live with. So it would be much better if it was a democratic solution, and one that is, accepted by all. So hopefully people will actually wake up and realize that there is no clear winner when people are dying and civilians are continuing to pay the price.
Stephen, finally, the Yemenis aren't really in a position to move things forward themselves at the moment because they have too much to worry about. Who might take the lead in this, the UN or possibly even the Trump administration?
I'm afraid that our administration is not in a position right now to take the leadership position. They are much more involved in supporting the Saudis and supporting issues which are very much aligned, that is to say, pushing back against Iran, pushing back against al-Qaeda and terrorism. So I don't believe that the Trump administration will take that role. The United Nations, sadly, has not been able to mobilize its own resources sufficiently, but I do think that's where the ability to do so is most likely concentrated, and I do think it needs to be made very clear to the parties in the conflict right now that there is no end for them other than a deeply destabilized region, which is in no one's interest, and certainly to the detriment of Saudi Arabia and Iran and all the other countries in the region in the long run if the Yemen cannot get back on its feet and stabilize.
Okay, Fahad, Stephen, Catherine, Baraa, thank you all very much for your contribution to this program. Thank you so much. Well, that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm John Terrett in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.